Hello, hello, and welcome back to Call Your Coven. I'm Bee. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm your resident numerologist. But today we're just talking about witchcraft.
Hi, Jeanna. My pronouns are also she, her, and I am the astrologer. But again, today I am just a bitch who lives in New York City who faces a lot of things I need to work around in the context of that. So we're going to talk about that.
And I'm Meg. My pronouns are she, they. I am technically the resident tarot reader, but I am a chaos monster, and I'm generally just wandering around with a necklace yelling at the sky wherever I am. So I'm also going to be here with vibes.
I think that is city witchery, though, especially because you can do that in a city. You can wander around holding your necklace and yelling at the sky.
Especially in New York. People do not give a shit what you do here.
And that's freedom, baby.
It is freedom.
Yeah.
That was religious freedom.
Yeah, I mean, happy July officially. And the month is booked, blessed, busy. And we want to talk about that first and foremost.
Yeah.
The first thing we have to shout out, though, the biggest thing, is that Meg Jones Wall has a book coming out on July 7th.
I literally never have a copy next to me.
I have a copy.
I got it. Can I beat Jeanna back?
There she is in all of her glory. If you're watching,
I'm sorry, your copy's not here. It's the same size as Finding the Fool. I just feel like that's very important to point out.
If you're on YouTube, you're getting a little preview.
Meg Jones Wall, would you like to tell the people anything about your book release?
She's alive. Tarot Spreads is a very practical companion to using spreads in your practice. It is packed with real life spreads that you can use and play with, but it's also broken down into 3 sections to talk about how to read spreads with confidence, how to write your own spreads that are actually going to work for you, and then how to revise existing spreads to tweak them and make sure that they're actually going to serve their purpose. So really at its heart, it is a book about asking really good questions of your cards, asking yourself questions to understand what you better want to receive from your cards, and just making sure that you can get through a reading with clarity instead of confusion. It's out in the world. She's doing her thing.
Yay!
Yay.
Book 2 under
the belt. I gotta finish book 3, but I have a few months to do that. So choices were made. And in the meantime, I'm working on the rebus and some other devil-oriented things. So the devil is with me this year. So, yeah, that is my biggest news. I have some other things happening, and we'll link to them in the show notes. But the book really is the big one.
The book is the big one. For me, the big thing that Meg and I are doing is that this month we are opening up the next session of The Growth, which is a 6-month-long spiritual and creative container for writers, artists, but honestly, anyone who has a creative practice. We get into tarot and astrology every month, but we're not really narrowing prompts or working groups on specific mediums or genres. So it's very much open genre, open container. Really, if you're a witchy or spiritually curious person who is interested in being more intentional and working with a pretty small group around developing your creative and spiritual practices and really learning to understand your natural rhythms, come on in. Doors open July 10th, and there will be another really generous 7-month payment plan because the world is terrible right now, and we need things to be cheaper. So we are we're offering an extended payment plan to folks in the hopes that it makes it more accessible. So
yeah. That's so exciting. I'm not in the Grove, but I love the Grove.
The Grove loves you too.
And I have just opened up written numerology readings for the first time in maybe ever. It's through my Discord, which you can get into by being a paid pal on my newsletter on Substack. There are 3 different types of readings for July, August, and September. So you can buy one of them. You can buy 3 of them. There are package prices. And yeah, again, July, you could maybe still get a slot. Reach out to me if you're interested, but definitely August and September are open. So I'm excited to read for some folks.
These readings are so good. So, like, truly, if you're listening to this and you have not had a numerology reading or you've not gotten the chance to work with Bee one-on-one, that's how we met, is because I booked a reading with Bee, and then I insisted on doing a couples reading with Jeanna, which is the only couples reading we've ever done.
We met was like, I met because Bee was met Bee because you were doing a reading for me, and it was so fucking good. I was like, can we be friends?
Yeah, literally, that's how this all happened.
Like, yeah.
No, it was such an honor for both, like to read for Meg and then to read for you both. And it was so exciting. I feel like you were one of the first couples readings that I had ever done, because I was just offering a new type of reading based on a realization that I had while working with the Magic Square, which is August's reading. It has to do with your Magic Square if you're interested. Yeah. And so it was so amazing and awesome to meet you both that way, and then to like weasel my way into your worlds more and more.
And now we have a podcast.
And now we have a podcast.
Now we're this. I know, that's almost one. I can't believe it.
Oh, it's wild.
Wild. Yes. And we used to live in the same city. So we have, I'm sure we have a lot of shared practices when it comes to coming to witchcraft and figuring out how to do it differently based on limitations. But now I live in Los Angeles, which is its own weird and wild West, literally. But I'm excited to talk about craft today in a city setting.
Yeah. And obviously, I think like we live in the two largest cities in the United States. And so there are going to be some things that might just be a little specific to the like areas that are much larger metros like Chicago, Houston, Atlanta, New York, LA. But even in that group, there is so much difference and specificity. And I think where I will open us into this is because I live in New York with my beloved. I've been here almost 10 years. I'm going to hit 10 years in January. And I think maybe then I'll start calling myself a New Yorker. I have been very
That's the marker, the unofficial marker.
I think 10 years of like continuously, staying through the pandemic, staying during COVID. Like I feel like I've earned my stripes at this point. But my adult life has largely been spent exclusively been spent between Minneapolis for 1 year, Boston for 5 years, and then New York for almost 10 years. So as an adult, I only know how to do witchcraft in a city setting. But I grew up, as I have spoken about at length, like very rural farm country Iowa. And so moving from being a country kid, like a country kid, to being a city girl, when I was starting to get into witchcraft, when I was starting to do research on the internet, starting to like read books like the Llewellyn, Practical Magic for Beginners, like kind of series that they have, I took a lot of things really literally because my understanding of having land was like growing up in rural farm country Iowa, where it was like 30 minutes to the nearest town, and that town had 1,000 people. So like we were very far out. And so I have so many memories of being a little kid, just like running around, being free, like sitting under an enormous tree in our yard, like basically talking to the tree, like all of this stuff. And then, cut to me being in my mid-late 20s in Boston, like reading these books that told me to go like sit in a private area surrounded by trees and to like meditate and imagine a cord running through the tailbone of my spine into the earth. And I, in addition to how like much that gets into difficulty with body stuff, and like there are people who like just physically can't do that, so we can't take that literally.
I was just about to say, like, nothing else can happen to my spine.
Nothing else. But like I took it so literally in that way of, oh, well, I don't have a place I can do that. Oh, the park always has like dozens of people. Sorry, this is a very long way of just saying that I feel like so much of my own relationship to witchcraft, even though I have developed it in a city, has had to do with me having to read a lot, learn a lot, listen to a lot of opinions that reinforce ideas that I had when I was about land and about space and about privacy that I recognize from how I grew up, but that have absolutely no application to someone living in like New York City. I'm going to pause there because I've already talked a lot, but if that is making sense, or like is a place that opens up some conversation.
It totally does, because I grew up in suburbia, and then when I was 19 moved to New York. I hit my 10 years in 2021, which was a totally wild year to be like, okay, I am a New Yorker, so to speak, and here we all are pretty much still hunkered down in this city and on this very small island altogether, which I think if you live in New York, you just can't think about that too much.
No.
Yeah. And then we moved to LA in 2023. So for the last couple of years, but for all intents and purposes, I have moved back to suburbia. And so it is interesting what you're talking about in terms of private and public space and like what craft looks like if you don't have access to certain types of spaces, whether that be natural, whether that be secluded or isolated, what have you, that I just think it's a great way to jump off, because so much of it is changing your practice away from the traditional sense.
Yeah.
And I think we've all been really clear that we're eclectic, except for this covenless witches who, do our own thing. And so there is a lot of permissioning yourself to do it differently that I think it takes to have a craft fit into different types of spaces. So yes, and to all of that.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. I think about when I was like starting a craft, I had my tarot cards for a few years and I was like, what does it mean to do witchcraft? What does it mean to do spell work? And so I was getting the books and I was trying to do the different things. And I remember reading like all about go to the crossroads, go to the crossroads, go to the crossroads. And the only image I had in my head, of course, was like a moonlit crossroads in like a completely isolated, like dirt path in the middle of the woods, like this beautiful, spooky, completely secluded, deeply witchy haunted area where you could go to a crossroads and say a prayer or like rend your garments or do whatever you were going to do in complete isolation and privacy, just you and the moon and the sky and the trees and the crossroads. And in reality, it's like, no, I lived in fucking Brooklyn. A crossroads was every intersection everywhere on every city block.
Yeah.
And so I remember like doing my little spells and then being like, you have to dispose of these spell components once they're burned or they're used or whatever at a crossroads. And so just like finding a little paper bag and putting them in there and like learning how to discreetly do what felt like a fucking drug drop at a garbage can in a crossroads.
Literally, that's where you trash them.
Drop it and don't look. So I'd be like, walk up to this is what happens when you write literal instructions for people who don't really want to follow rules but feel like they're supposed to. I was like, okay, I guess I'm stuffing my spell components in a paper bag, making a beeline for a trash can at a crossroads near my house, dropping it in the trash can, and then immediately turning and walking a different direction without looking back. And I always felt like I was doing a drop. But I was like, okay, I guess this is what I have access to as a crossroads. My practice is wildly different now. It's far simpler. I haven't brought anything to a crossroads in years. But I think there is something so important to think about in terms of like, what do you have access to, like you said, in terms of nature? What do you have access to in terms of privacy? Like I can go into nature, but there's always going to be people around, right? I can go sit by the water, but there's going to be 100 people that walk by while I'm trying to say a 5-minute prayer, right? And what do you have access to in terms of like being able to follow a spell or a ritual or a prayer or a recommendation to like the letter of the law versus can you learn to give yourself some permissioning, as you were saying, to be like, okay, what is the purpose of this direction and how can I embody the purpose of this without feeling like I have to literally do it? And is that something that feels like safe and okay for me?
I think that's such a good thread to like tack on what is the purpose of this, not like which is something it took me many years of like trial and error, and also just like not doing things. Like there's a lot that I just didn't do because I couldn't do it. And I did not have the confidence, like both in myself, but also again, I was so new, I was learning and I didn't have the confidence to be like, oh, this is how it'll apply in a setting for New York City, as opposed to like a setting in the country where it is entirely feasible to go off and like wander off into a random section of your yard and bury some spell ingredients where like in New York, it's like, what are you doing? Are you doing that in a potted plant? Are you doing, which sometimes, yes,
turning it
even
in your
though,
compost bin, like where are you going to put it?
right.
Like,
Like, do you have a compost bin?
right. We don't have a
Can you
right, like,
it took me just a really long time, like years, to actually start to feel confident that I could like shift things around to accommodate my need, to be an accommodation, to accommodate like my physical needs, but also like very literally where I lived. Because it's very clear to me that most witchcraft books are, many of them are so wonderful, so helpful, not written for people who live in an urban setting.
Or like people who like don't have a lot of time or energy or anything. Like I think that's probably a hot take that like doesn't need to go
That's
in this
real.
conversation. But I do think that city witchery as a concept, it forces you to be flexible and imaginative already. And so kind of what we're talking about of like, what is the purpose of this? Like,
Yeah.
can you do it in 3 steps instead of 12? Probably, if your intention is really strong and your focus is really strong and your efforts are meaningful. So I do think it has to do with like a paring back. And in that does beget a lot of self-trust, because I think so often as well, and especially in capitalism, tools become very prominent in terms of like, get this crystal for this spell and get this type of salt for this type of thing. And you need 87 candles. And I love tool. I have 3 candles on the way to me right now for a spell. Like I'm totally that witch. And also, one bodega candle can do what other spell candles could never.
Yo.
You know,
Say
and
it.
like
Say it. I get my pillar candles at our local grocery store because it's just it's the whole Goya aisle. They have like like 5 shelves just devoted to saints candles and like basic color candles. And I'm like, that's where I get my shit.
Yeah.
Because
and every once in a while, I had to ask a friend of mine. I was doing a big working the other day, and I couldn't find the color of candle that I wanted. And I decided for once that I cared about the color of the candle, because usually I just use white ones. So my friend like went and found this specific color candle at their local bodega and brought them to me, and I was like, a gift. But like, because there are some advantages to living in New York, right? When it comes to spell work, the bodega candle, tried and true, deeply magical object. But yeah, I think that idea of like accessibility and accommodation, it's like, do you really need like 18 candles and this exact color of glitter and this 12 herbs and this one kind of railroad spike from this one specific place? Or do you actually just like need to sit with yourself and like have a cup of tea and like pray? You know what I mean?
well,
like
if you are an intricate ritual, need the things, like this is no shade at all. This is just coming from the perspective of needing to pare down for logistical purposes.
Yeah. I wrote down a list of some features, I think, of city living, common city living, that I would also be so curious to hear you like extrapolate on for suburbia / like cities. I'm thinking like Houston or like LA that are so big and so spread out that things like cars and yards are much more common than in like a Boston or New York. Okay, but yeah, some features in like, dear listener, maybe you don't live in like New York City, but all of these apply to you because that's your urban environment and like you live downtown somewhere. So, okay, having to work with a small apartment or with roommates, which brings up issues of privacy. Also brings up a limited storage or altar space. A lot of people have very limited storage space in larger cities. Also brings up like how sensitive your particular like new build or pre-war building is to fire alarms, in terms of like what y'all were saying with like candle magic and like, can you even use live flame, or is it going to set the whole building off? Like, what does that do to people who want to be doing different kinds of spell work? And we've already talked about this, but like limited access to private green space, especially. Maybe you have a rooftop, maybe you have a balcony, but like a private, like the fact that we have a yard is honestly extraordinary. And And also to what y'all were saying too about how even like public green space is going to have a lack of privacy in larger cities. And I also actually wrote down safety, because I think about like when your green space, when the only green space you have access to is public, and then it's like, go gather, I don't know, mugwort under the moon in Central Park under the witching hour. It's like, you know who's not going into Central Park? Me. Like,
Absolutely not.
it's genuinely actually like a safety issue sometimes.
Yes.
So, which it isn't necessarily if like you're just on your own land or you're in a really secluded like area. But yeah, I just wrote down those things as kind of like common features of the limitations, lack of space, lack of privacy, lack of all that we're all working with. I'm curious if you have
100%.
anything to like add or expand or change or
Well, when you said the thing about the pre-war or new build, before you said fire alarms, I literally thought you were about to say like the spirits that already exist there, whether or not they want you to work.
That's also
Because I definitely have had like spirit happenings in pre-war, like older builds that I have not had in new builds.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's where my brain went. And then you said fire alarms and I was like, oh, right. Not
No, but that also gets to the point of like, if we are working within an animistic framework in which we all have spirit relationships and in which the dead are around and spirits of the land, then an urban area, just by fact of it being urban, is going to have a lot more spirit activity
100%.
generally, because there's so many fucking people here and there's so many dead here. And we're on islands and like still a lot of really slowly moving water, as Bee said earlier. So, you know.
And buildings constantly getting ripped down and then rebuilt over and over again. So the land is disturbed, but also the building itself is like...
Yeah.
Well, and the spirits that are attached to buildings become attached to areas if the building doesn't exist. And then this is a whole nother conversation, but then you get confused spirits who are like truly don't mean to be there. They mean to be in whatever version of the city they lived in. And it's like, oh, that doesn't exist anymore, babe. Like, yeah.
And I think that also brings up the like doing cleansing and protection work is important for everybody. But like if you're in a really densely populated area, a really old, densely populated area, like spiritual hygiene is just like extra important for all the reasons that Bee was saying. It's like there's just so much that's around and that's not well. And maybe that isn't like maleficent, like it's not like it's not malefic, but like that, like you're saying, like is confused, is disrupted, is disturbed, like should not be called in with a Ouija board.
Like, oh my God. Well, no. That's like one portion of superstitious magic and like myth that I fully like. That is the propaganda I actually buy into.
No,
is that
same.
Ouija boards should not.
I do
sold
not
at Walmart, and they should not be used.
My very dear friend who gets me a lot of witchy things, but she is not a witch herself. She got me a custom Ouija board that was like a Barbie Ouija board.
It rules.
I do love it, but have I ever used it? No. Will I ever use it? No. What I did was actually like turn it upside down so that we could use it for a D&D battlefield. So it was like, we're not going to be like, we're not calling in anything that's wandering because, oh boy, like.
Because so much is wandering.
So much is wandering and we don't have to talk to everything. I don't want to like halt the conversation on this, but I did want to just emphasize what you said, Jeanna, about privacy, because I feel like that's such a big thing. And I feel like even if someone's listening to this and you're not a city witch, I think that there are so many ways in which our space is encroached or not private, especially for folks who might be disabled or who's still COVID conscious and might be in an area where it's not really, you're not still able to go out very much because people just are not masking. And we also have mask bans and ICE agents, and there's just a lot of shit happening right now. So But I'm thinking about people who might be mostly housebound, who might not have access to green space that they can really get to in an accessible way, and who might have roommates, or who might like be living at home with parents or family who doesn't understand, and to be working in a very limited, confined area. I feel like a lot of what we're going to be talking about, even if you're not someone who resides in a city, might also be really applicable when we're thinking about small amounts of spaces, limited resources, limited ability to go find a crossroads in the woods, for example, or go harvest mugwort under a new moon or whatever. I just wanted to kind of underline that, because I think that's just a really important piece that does not get talked about in most of these resources I see enough, is accessibility around that particular issue. So.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that the Venn diagram between like limitations, like based on location, like a more urban area, or like limitations based on very literal accessibility issues is like, there's so much overlap in terms of what is not accounted for in a lot of the most disseminated witchcraft books.
Yeah. I will shout out Disabled Witchcraft by Candy Zeller, Candy with a K. I read it earlier this year, and for me, it was a really quick read because a lot of the practices I am familiar with, but it's basically just a list of ways to do like low spoons witchcraft. So I would actually be curious to go back through it and like see how many our city related or like good pivots for city witchcraft as well. So yeah, wider audience than just disabled, but that one's a good if you need like a quick resource that's going to get right to it, that one is nice. Chef's kiss.
Yeah, because there's a lot. You see the occasional thing on city witchery, but like those things tend to not answer. They tend to be like, consider having a potted plant instead of a garden, because you can't. It's like, yes, we're gay, we know. Like there are potted plants, but I don't know. I feel like a lot of the fundamental questions that I had, I ultimately just had to kind of like, for example, one of the most obvious ones that has already been discussed: how do you dispose of spell components? Like,
let's talk about that.
Safely, hygienic, like,
you do a drug drop in a trash can at a crossroads, obviously.
This one is more in a house, in a suburban setting. I never had this item in my house before moving to Los Angeles. But in my working with Hagate, that was actually the first, I think, kind of real craft that I did here in Los Angeles, like physical craft, was opening the door to having a relationship with her, making the first offering. And that was at a crossroads in Griffith Park. So I can talk about that too. But in terms of disposal, I literally have a garbage disposal in my kitchen, and Hagate is an energetic spiritual garbage disposal of sorts. And she literally said that materia could go down, like appropriate materia could go down the garbage disposal, and that would be fine with her in terms of disposing matter. So I totally think any garbage can be fine. And that disposing of things doesn't have to, just my hot take, doesn't have to be as ritualistic as I think some practitioners want it or need it to be. But yeah, a garbage disposal was one that I was like, hey, cool.
I love that. And that, again, I think the intention piece that has been mentioned is so important. And also like talking to your components. And I definitely used to do this for years. I would just like be like, well, cinnamon is for passion, let's put it in there, or whatever the fuck. And I didn't really understand that. I was like, oh, I have to wake up the cinnamon, I have to talk to it, I have to sing to it, I have to like wake it up to be part of this before just like dumping some, whatever. But I explain to everything how it's going to be disposed, that like when it's done, it's probably going in the, like, sometimes if it's a spell that is not a lot of components and that it can be like entirely burned to ash, I will take it into our backyard and like, toss it to the wind. But if there is like a pillar candle, or not a pillar, but like a jar pillar candle that's a part of that, I tend to, when it's done, I put like a little salt in it, just kind of like with a little prayer, and put it in the garbage can. Because even though so much that I read, like you were saying, B, was like, don't put things in the garbage can. Like, that's disrespectful, or it's bad for this. It's like, what else are you supposed to do?
Where else are we going to put it?
Yeah, like there are some things you can flush, but honestly,
Mhm.
if you're conscious and living in a city, then you have to think about the water supply. So like, what are we flushing?
Exactly.
If you are looking to bury it, again, maybe you don't have access to that, and maybe you would look like the biggest fucking creep in the world, and
That's actually the thing. I'll take
part of it.
I've taken like water and liquid offerings that I'll pour out like in a public park, but I have never buried something in a public park because it would look like I've committed a crime.
Well,
Like a bag of cash, like of
if
human.
you live in a city, see something, say something, and like someone's gonna say something about you.
Yeah.
Okay, since I already brought it up, I will say that if you are listening to this and you hike in Griffith Park, there is a traditional crossroads of 3 roads coming together in Griffith Park. It is by a child's playground, which also adds in an additional layer of, are you doing weird shit in front of parents and children? Okay. But it is there, and kind of at the crossroads, like between 2 of them, and then there's a third one over here, between like the 2 main roads of the crossroads, there is a big tree that kind of comes down. And so what I did was I left a completely natural decomposing offer to Hagate of like traditional items like onion, dust, hair, like clippings, like literally you feed her garbage and she makes it beautiful. And so I brought it in plastic, but then left it on its own so that it could decompose and that it wasn't going to be unsafe for any animals that might come across it. But this was a little easier of a burial job. I didn't do any kind of digging. I just put it at the root of the tree and kind of covered it with leaf and like other natural materia that was on the ground. And we've been banging ever since. So that's a great spot if anyone's looking.
Love it. I love having an actual recommendation. You can be like, this spot in this park in this area. Like,
I have some spots for New Yorkers too. Don't worry.
No, I love the North Woods of Central Park. Just as the most magical little fairy tale place in the whole city. And and people do a lot of witchcraft there. A lot of witchcraft is happening in the North Woods. Yeah, and which is also actually something I love. See, this is the thing. We don't prep. We just like are fucking realizing things as we talk, which is that there are going to be, like, if you go to a cemetery or graveyard in New York, you will see things that other practitioners have clearly left and done. Again, like just in an urban area, the density is going to be higher of people who do this, which is nice, but it also does mean like respecting other people's offerings that you see at the crossroads and like understanding that you are not just an individual practitioner, even if you are, like all of us, like even if you are an individual practitioner, like there's still a lot happening around you. And like maybe also if you're someone who's like trying to start doing work in a cemetery or like trying to do work with the dead, like understand that there are a lot of other people already doing that, even if you don't know them, and like just coming correct in your approach, that you're not like, especially for like white girls, especially, that we're not like, we are going to be the guardian of like Greenwood Cemetery, which has like hundreds and thousands of people who already do that.
And it's a terribly magical, wonderful, beautiful place. And also, like,
the audacity. Like, hello, just me.
I have finally arrived here safely.
It's like, just because it's, but that's also general in life. Just because it's new to you doesn't mean it's new. Like, doesn't. Yeah.
Well, and I think we're all talking about being conscientious, and that includes, again, like, what are you flushing? Are you thinking outside of that action? And I think that so much of city witchcraft, but all witchcraft, like, it really does test your ethics, because it's like, are you thinking big enough outside of yourself enough to do this working? And sometimes you're not, and that's okay. This is not in any way standing in judgment or like demonizing that time that you didn't think about that one thing. Like, again, who amongst us? But it is just, if you are trying to build a craft, or if you have a pre-existing practice that you are always working to be as appropriate and healthy and with it as possible, I think being conscientious and opening your lens outside of just that one action. And then, like Jeanna said, not being afraid to, and in fact, being encouraged to clear things, set physical and energetic boundaries when you're doing workings, and then consecrate things as you see fit as well. Yeah.
I think a lot about the fact that, and I think this is common in a lot of areas, but New York gets the reputation for it for whatever reason, about how common the all black uniform is, which is something that, like, outside of this, I only ever did in, like, when I worked in the service industry. Like, you wear all black. But here it's like people, every level, every socioeconomic, every ethnic group, every neighborhood, you've got like half the people on the street are just head to toe black. And I think a lot about the fact that, like, that feels very much like a container, and it feels very much like a kind of energetic, like, wall of protection in that way that black is very protective. Not to do too much like color psychology, which is fraught, but I think a lot about like how dense it is and how much we're picky, especially those of us who are like, I fucking hate when people are like, I'm just so sensitive to spirit, but like, but I like, you know what I mean. I hate that shit. But like, when you are someone who is like talking to spirit, tapped in, leaving offerings, doing prayers, like, you're just gonna kind of attract more, pick up more, and just making sure that you are not catching any hitchhikers on the subway. Yeah.
Yeah, literally.
Literally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Since we've already talked about the Northwoods and New York, I will give my spots.
Yeah.
So I am an Upper West Side girly. I split my time in New York truly bouncing back and forth between a 10-block radius in the Upper West Side and a 20-block radius on the Lower East Village, Alphabet City side of things. And the Alphabet City side of things is really quite easy because Enchantments is right there. So you have like all of your witchy needs. And then Flower Power is also there in the East Village if you need herbs. And you can do things in Tompkins Square Park that you can't do in other parks.
Oh, yes.
You can.
Yes. Yeah. You can get away with a lot.
You can get away with a lot.
Yeah, nobody is even noticing your drug drop in Tompkins Square Park, okay?
Yeah.
So that's like a different kind of witchcraft than an Upper West Side witchcraft. But Upper West Side witchcraft, you do have access to Central Park. So Jeanna already said the Northwoods. There is also on the West Side a 10-block radius between like 100th and 110th, like which will take you to the Northwoods. So like maybe a little lower into some of the 90s, but if you go too far, you'll get too densely populated. But especially on the West Side, there are these beautiful little pockets of the park that are so populated with flora and fauna. Yeah. And like some of them are little reading areas for kids and like play areas for kids and stuff. But it's kind of off the beaten path. You just have to explore around there. But there is always mugwort in those, like just south of the Northwoods. There's always mugwort in that area. They're huge, like abundant mugwort. So I did look this up. There is no law that says that you cannot forage in Central Park. There is a law that says that you cannot take things from the park or desecrate the park. So it's essentially if you are like in communication with your spirits, with the land, with the mugwort, and everything feels like energetically good to go. Again, you take what you need and not any more than that. I think, again, conscientious, we're rationing. But it's basically a don't get caught kind of thing. And I have personally done that. So, but I don't live there anymore. So come and get me. No. But yeah,
Parks are chronically understaffed. There's no one that's going to find you.
I know. But there are lots of private spots up there as well that you can find. And there's also even water. This sounds so funny, but water features. There's like a waterfall around 104th. That was like my sit spot for years. Please, someone go take really good care of it.
It's waterfall is really beautiful.
It's so perfect.
It's so beautiful. I've done candle workings there, like truly like fixing the candle to the rock and waiting for it to burn down and then disposing of it. I also came across someone's working, like Jeanna was talking about. However, they left their candle burning and deserted it. So
what?
I know. So I have also interfered in people's workings when they did not use safety, which is something that I think we are going to talk about too. But that was like, I was baffled. I was like, are you joking me? Like I literally went to sit down and I was like, there's a whole candle burning right here. And somebody just left this. Like I was,
oh my God.
Anyway.
Also, like,
everything's fine.
That's what you were saying earlier, B. We live in a, like, pretend it's a city. Fran Lebowitz. Like, pretend it's a city. Pretend there is also a natural environment that we're trying to be respectful of. Like, use your brain.
I know. But that area of Central Park is like really gorgeous and really receptive to work in my experience and just beautiful.
Yeah, that whole area feels very sacred. I used to do a lot of like sitting by the river on either side actually, because I lived in Chelsea. I lived off of 11th Avenue when I first moved to New York in 2014, and then I lived in Harlem for a while, and then I lived in a few different places in Brooklyn, and now we're over in Queens. So I've lived in 3 of the boroughs and like different sides, but I've also like worked on different sides of the park. And sometimes you just want to walk home from the Lower East Side up to Harlem because that's the kind of person that I am. So yeah, I would go find little hidden corners by the river whenever I could. I would also go sit by the reservoir a lot, honestly, in North Central Park, just because there's a really great running trail that I would run at because I used to be a runner and do that 6-mile loop in Central Park a lot. But also, there were little hidden spots around the reservoir that you could kind of tuck into, and I would like pull tarot cards and just sit over there, and it was nice. But yeah, I think it's always wild to think about the different places that I've lived and like how it was different when I would just want to go sit by the water before I had a magical practice versus how much more desperate I feel to like have green space to be in quietly, since kind of moving away from the church and moving into more of this style of practice. I've gotten farther and farther from the water the longer I've lived in New York because it's expensive. And that's, for me, being by the water in particular is a real necessity for just my sense of self, but also a lot of my magic and just spiritual practice has to do with water. So
it is the one major feature that our home lacks, which is that it is like a 30+ minute walk to the water if you can get to it, because also a lot of the parks
they finally reopened the one near us, but it's like a year and a half. They closed it like the month after we moved to this particular spot. And so
which is, I think, also like a city thing. It's like if you don't have a car, like this is only going to be more like northeastern cities. I feel like in Chicago and like LA, like it's like you have most American cities, you fucking need a car. But like also that's also though a thing, like how far do you want to drive in a city to get to like the green space? It not just being really readily easily available is a whole thing.
Oh, I want to add one thing about backyards before that I just thought about. I have a really lovely relationship with my backyard. It is private. We do have a gorgeous space. I don't bury things in my backyard. First of all, we're renting. So that's always something too that I think with cities, it's like, how much can you actually get away with doing that's going to alter either the space you're in or like, for instance, this backyard. But that's just like not the relationship that I have with it. So I think just fully taking that off anybody's table I should have said it earlier when we were talking about yard space. But yeah,
No,
I
it's
haven't
all
felt
related.
comfy to bury things in the backyard. So I've found other ways of disposing. Yeah.
Yeah, because also like even I don't know, it's very different to me if like you're someone with a lot of, just like a lot of land or there's a lot of available land to possibly do
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
on,
Yeah.
like versus again, a city, it's right there. Like also I don't want a particular like malefic working buried that
Like
close to the
rooted
house.
in your
Yeah,
backyard.
like
Rooted.
like planting it in the yard. Like, no, thank
Yes.
you.
No, thank you. No, thank you. I would
Yeah.
rather I don't know. It is partly why, even though fire safety is a thing, and I've learned some hard lessons over the years with that, I do prefer to burn my stuff because, like, burn my spells, do pretty low maintenance things that I can just burn down to an ash because it's just easier. Like, it's kinder to the environment. It's easier. But what you said, B, reminds me too that like I'm thinking especially of some sphere and sundry materia that I have, but like if you are doing a more malefic working, or if you are doing some baneful, like binding kind of magic, I see a lot of advice given around do this outside, don't do this in your house. And it's like, that's not something that's really possible for a lot of folks like living in a city. And so ergo that informs. Are you laughing at me saying ergo, Meg?
No, I'm laughing at the idea of going outside of like a big apartment building and just like standing in front of it with a candle, like trying to pray and like throwing salt around and like, because yeah, it doesn't make any sense. No, ergo is correct. And I didn't mean to cut you off. I was literally laughing thinking about some of the buildings I've lived in, or like even a fancier building where you have access to like a shared rooftop or something.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to go do a fucking spell out there, you know? Sorry,
No.
please continue with that.
Oh no, just that like I've had to get comfortable doing a lot of stuff that is baneful in my house, which then informs like, okay, so that means that whatever protocols I'm doing this week with like cleansing the house, blessing, it's like, okay, up it by like 2 times, 3 times. Like we have to really keep it on lock just because again, like, do you have the privacy? And I think a lot about how much of this is solved and how much I could have solved in my life, in my witchcraft, so much earlier if I had just realized I could explain the limitations that I had as a corporeal being to spirit, and that spirit, 9 times out of 10, is totally fucking chill with it. Like, I just wish I had thought that, like, instead of having to do certain things, because I don't know, someone I respected said that that was how they did it, that, like, what if I just explained like and had more conversations and was like, this is what I can do for you right now, this is the context we have to work in right now, like, is this okay?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I love that you took it there because my next thing I was like, yes, let's talk about indoor witchcraft. Like we've been talking a lot about being out in the city and or being outside and where to sneak in and limitations to that. But there is so much indoors. And yeah, especially if you're an altar, like somebody who uses an altar, that's so interesting. I've had no altar before. I've had a space literally in this room that I'm in right now that is like a altar that is stationary and not a whole lot of people see it or touch it. But I've also had like really public altars in the house that like if you come in, you're going to see it. And I know that's a well, a need for my home personally, but I was going to say that's a privilege, like in a lot of ways, to be able to have more of a public altar space. But that's not obviously the only thing that indoor witchcraft entails. But thoughts? I'm like, bleh, thoughts?
I think the thing that's coming to mind for me is again just getting back to that simplicity thing, because yeah, as a indoor kid generally who mostly is doing magic indoors and who also is not really an altar keeper or an elaborate spells or ritual person, mostly I'm fucking around with like tea lights and birthday candles and like bodega candles and herbs from the kitchen. I'm very much, I don't, the delineations of different kinds of witch I know are just like not generally super helpful, but if I had to own being a kitchen witch. I'm 100% a kitchen witch. I use a lot of mundane herbs in my cooking. I weave that magic into my food. Those kinds of things are all very accessible and easy for me. But the simpler I can make a thing, that's what I'm going to do. Like if there is a simple alternative, if there is an inexpensive alternative, or if there is a way that I can do something using stuff that I already have in my house, I'm always going to choose that option. That's always going to be what I want. And at least for me, like as doing magic kind of indoors and then not having to really dispose of much or like take care with where the components are coming from or where they're going to go, that just makes it feel a lot more attainable to me. And for me, that attainability and ability to be like, oh, hey, did you want a candle today? Okay, yeah, let me light that for you. Hang on one second. Like, and then just doing that and then like moving along with my day makes me much more likely to do those things on a consistent basis, even if it's not super ritualized. I don't know if I'm delineating that well, but I think that there can be such a difference between doing something consistently and making a ritual out of it.
Yeah.
And different people are going to be drawn to different things. I think there's something really beautiful about like, I'm going to do the same thing at the same time. And I have certainly done rituals like that. But I like the ability to quickly grab something and whip a little spell together and send some magic in a direction or wrap some protection around someone or a group of people. I've been doing a lot of protection magic these last few months. That for me, that makes it feel more like me, if that makes sense. Like the same vibe of like, I'm going to jot off a quick email or I got to scribble this idea down to write it later. It's like, oh, I can just do a quick little bit of magic. I don't know if that's exactly what you were aiming for, but that's what kind of came to mind first.
I appreciate that you brought up altars because, again, do you have space for one? Do you have the ability to have one in your house even? Like, I didn't start doing like altar. Like, I had little corners in my bedroom when I was still living with roommates, when I was like really actually embracing and getting into this. But I didn't really start having proper altars, let alone like shrines with, statuary of particular deity or spirit until I lived in my studio. And I had my little witch wall, which was so special. But like, it really, I think that that's such a thing. It's like just having the privacy or like being with people who are like-minded enough that and respectful enough that they're not going to like fuck with it. It took a really long time for me to start to realize that altars were part of my practice because it took me a long time to get the space that allowed a particular outgrowth. And I think related to that too is like the fact that so many of us have limited storage space in varying capacities. So it's like you can get witchy books, you can get a lot of oils or whatever it is that you particularly like having in your house, but like how storage friendly is it is a really big concern. And I also like, I know that we would have twice as many altars in our house if we had a house that was twice as big. Like, I know that my altars will grow to fill the house. Home. Like,
100%
but I think sometimes like about how not like frustrating it is, but like I'll see pictures. So to an extent, the altar porn that's online, like mostly I don't buy into it because mostly I'm like, why are you putting your altar on blast for everyone to fucking see? Truly. That is so silly. But sometimes I see how much like space other people have for just to buy things that are like an enormous mirror that's like just for their altar. And I'm like, I wish I had, because it's like my tiny little working altar.
We just had a spare dining room that was just an altar space because some of these places are huge. Like, yeah.
I mean, I would be, if we were like back in, medieval times, I would be that bitch who like wanted her own little chapel, like with, like,
oh yeah.
Where?
Oh yeah.
Like, I understand why people did that. I really, really fundamentally do. I think also kind of back to like the self-trust and confidence is like having faith in your practice and in your relationship with spirit, and that like the physical, how much or how little you can physically manifest that in a given space, like is not indicative of its strength or depth.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also we talked about tools earlier, but like if you want to have items that are meaningful, they do not have to be purchased. Like you can, and again, this goes back to kind of the research that we were talking about in our spirit relationship conversation, but you can use colors instead of items. Like if you wear a blue shirt while you're doing the working, then that becomes part of the working. If you
Also, that's like very literal, like Pikatrix, like old grimoires are very much you dress for the working. So just to like underline that 5 times.
Yes, that's really fair. That's super fair. Yeah, and then so bringing in colors, bringing in symbolic items or ornamental items that you either do want to consecrate to a certain spirit or working, or you just want it to be representative of something. I think about so much bringing, if you can bring in natural items like fruits or chocolate or things into your working that would be, you know, easy to dispose of and easy to get to, you know, and like if you can get a pomegranate, that's a really easy way to work with like a whole bunch of spirits. But like, or if you're doing like a creative spell or a fertility spell, like a pomegranate is also amazing. And that's like can be easier to come by in a city setting than some other like hyper specific items. So just starting to think kind of creatively, like Meg was saying, what's in your kitchen that you can use? What's in your pantry? You know, what cleaning ingredients do you use on the regular that you can add like a drop of two or something else to, and then all of a sudden it's a potion, you know? Like you just have to, I feel like honestly to be a city witch, you actually have to believe in magic.
Yeah.
In
The magic of the everyday. And like, I think too, I don't know, I just like something that came to mind while you were talking, B, was just the way that like, I think living here for so long at this point has really underlined how much a city is a living thing and how much like there are spirits of the land here that pre-exist what we would call like New York City. There are so many spirits of the dead here. And then there's also just like the literal spirit that is the city itself and that is being in relationship with the city. And so like canvassing for Zolron can be a magical practice, you know, like I don't know, I just think so much about how like when you live in a place like this, I mean, you certainly can be very removed from the general, but like, you know, just kind of understanding yourself as an interconnected piece with millions of other interconnected pieces really, yeah, just highlights how magical the everyday is. And I think the more I've developed a relationship with like the city and the land here, the more grounded my witchcraft has become in a way that I should have anticipated, but like that has been pleasantly surprising.
Yeah. Do we want to shout out some of our favorite places in cities too?
Yes, I love that by way of like kind of moving toward closing. I also wanted to ask though, maybe we like can do this before or after. I was going to ask, because we've talked a lot about the limitations of living in a city for witchcraft, and I was wondering if we could say like, what are some happy things?
Oh,
about?
100%.
I mean, we have been, but like just by way of like putting a bow.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Like I want to say something that might need to then be edited into a past moment, but I think too, when thinking about like spells and workings and rituals, I think there is something that often gets overlooked around reusing things that you have versus things having to be destroyed or burned or flushed or disposed of. Or like if you have a tarot deck, you can use that for your spells and you do not have to rip up the card afterwards. You can just put it back in the deck. Like you can cleanse it if you want to, but you know what I mean? Like crystals, like jars of herbs, like honey jars, objects in your house that then don't have to be destroyed afterwards. I use a lot of those things in my practice as well. I mean, I wear jewelry that is connected to different things, which I've talked about before in lieu of an altar practice. But I think that there is also something really special about developing relationships with objects or with pieces of clothing or with like songs or playlists or vision boards or textures or movements or all of those different things can also be part of your practice. And that can bring a different level of creativity and accessibility to your practice that might be easier to manage in your house, right? If you have like one small box of items that you just reuse for different spells or repurpose for different workings versus I have to go buy a new candle every time I want to do this. What if you have an electric candle, right? Like I just feel like there are different ways to be creative around that can be really helpful that I also do in my practice and find a lot of value in.
I'm so glad that you said that because it is so true. And then secondhand is another thing that I think will get added to that. And you already said, you know, a friend goes and picks things up for you and drops them off, but also like Meg literally mailed me a statue earlier this year that they weren't using anymore. And so I think that there's something really deeply special about sharing tools. And I think that that's a good segue into like what's amazing about living in a city is if you can find and create for yourself witchy community, even if that just looks like you becoming the patron of a store or a meditation center, I think that there's so much opportunity to share resources, and that's really cool. And that's not a New York only thing. Like I literally have a group of friends that within the last 2 days, someone was like, hey, I'm gonna pare down my crystal collection. Here are pictures. Does anyone want them? I will mail them to you. Or you can come pick them up or drop them off. This is a COVID conscious group of friends. But like, I think there is some, not in a way that is old myth, like every tarot deck must be gifted to you kind of stuff, but in a real way that's like, I think there's a lot of power in sharing resources and rehoming items. And there's also a lot of people who will say like, no, it has to be new. And I just don't fuck with that. So
No.
I don't either.
We just did a whole Sphere and Sundry exchange with our D&D group. Everyone brought the Sphere and Sundry that they sort of, it was funny though, because we all brought like so much of the same thing. It was like, oh, this is why we're friends. It's because these are the things that we don't resonate with.
All bought this materia and none of us are using it.
It's very funny, but also like, I think of like exactly what you're saying. It's like, and even again, like to shout out like online, truth, you know, the BPAL forums, like, man, I came up on those, like, you know, like the Sphere and Sundry community, like any of our discords, like you aren't using a thing that's taking up a lot of room in your small city apartment and want to send it somewhere, someone will probably take it. Like, yeah.
And it will probably be me. They're like, thank you.
Yes, I love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are some other things that you love about living in a city?
I mean, being so real, it's so, even for the, you know, alleged lack of nature that can happen depending on like where you are, just where someone's located in a particular area. Like cities are more likely to have bookstores with esoteric sections. They are more likely to have witchy bookstores, period. Witchy stores, period. B already shouted out my faves, Enchantment and Flower Power. Catland is long since closed, although we have some stuff from them. We went to their like closing Everything Must Go sale, and we almost got a psychic sign, like neon psychic sign.
I'm always going to be sad that we were not in time to get the psychic sign. Like
we were like an hour too late.
Oh,
like,
no.
It was hated. We got some other stuff from them, like our porch chairs are actually like the former backyard chairs.
Some big jars for herbs, and we got some like folding chairs that we use in the yard and stuff. So like,
but that is to say, like, I think that it's just the ability to walk into a shop and they're pretty non-judgmental and you can get any array of things that are maybe not as commonly available in a grocery store. Like, it's so valuable. And also just to shout out like Enchantments, even if you don't live in New York, we're going to have this linked in the show notes. Enchantments sells so much of their formulary online, like not just their custom candles, but their powders and their oils. And so much of it is so good and also much, much cheaper than certain places. So like,
which we also love, but
like, I'm like, why am I going to get a cleansing oil when I could just get some Van from Enchantments for like $10? Like, I'm going to, you know, so.
I also haven't been to the new Enchantments. They moved.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, they're on Avenue A now, I think, like above Tompkins Square. And they have a cafe now too, which I think is
I didn't realize. I've not been to them. I actually don't even know if I went to the old one. I think I've only ever ordered from them online, which is wild since I live here, but yeah.
The old one was like wonderfully spooky.
Yeah, it was in a basement.
Yeah, like downstairs.
Yeah.
That's correct, honestly.
Yeah.
But no, I love the access. I love that a lot of people tour through here. I love that it's easy to get stuff. And also that then you can be like coming out of Enchantments with a huge bag of something and no one looks twice, which I think is really something that only happens in certain other neighborhoods in the country, even like or a certain other like New Orleans or Salem, or like there are different areas that have like a high tolerance for that. But there's a lot less, I think, just everyday judgment or like shame that you have to feel just walking up to, like if you're a new person, just like a new like witch newly exploring, just walking up to, such a shop.
Yeah. Yeah, and to your point, like even the other bookshops still are going to have stuff, right? I bought my first tarot deck from the Strand, which was one of my favorite places in the city, and I'd only lived here for like a couple of, maybe a year or two. I don't know what time is. But I remember being like, oh, there's a whole basement section. There's this whole area with a table out of all these tarot decks and tarot books. And that was back in 2016. So there's way more now. But like, I remember being like, I love that I'm just going to this big famous bookshop and picking up the tarot deck that I want. And I don't even have to go to, because I went to some specialty occult bookshops and I couldn't find the deck that I wanted. And so I was like, okay, I want to go to this one. I think there's something about the sacredness of the fewer and farther between natural spaces in a city too, where they do feel extra special because they are not everywhere. Which is not to say that if you're in a place where there's lots of natural space, I literally grew up in Vermont. It's like the most beautiful place in the world. It's so magical and gorgeous. And it's just a very special place. And also like the way that when you do find a green space that you can walk into where you actually are surrounded by trees, and how that's so much harder to find. I think there's an appreciation for that I have when I'm able to get it here that feels different than when I'm, I could just walk outside and stand in a really beautiful backyard. There's just something about that, like the appreciation of nature that you find in a city when you walk into a park and people are out enjoying it and everyone's like, we came to the park to see nature and to be in nature. Like it's just got a different energy to it that I think is really special. Like you can't go to the cloisters and not feel like you're in one of the most magical places in the city. And it's because people go there to be there as opposed to just being like, yeah, there's another tree,
There's a lot of intention, I think, in like what you're saying, Meg, in terms of like, because I was thinking, I'm like, well, I find the energy really special, but I think it's especially in those like spontaneous moments where everyone is gathered around like a live performance in Union Square. Yes. Yeah. Or like when I, used to go up to write at the cloisters when I still lived in Harlem for years and years. And it would be me and a bunch of other people, like very intentionally sitting in the courtyard, like on a quiet, just in total quiet, just writing and reading. And there's something I think very like collective effervescence, like magical about the feeling that you can have of like that awareness, again, that conscientiousness that we are one of many, that like that just like hits me in the body so much more here than anywhere else I've lived. It's like, oh, like this is a moment that all of us are having and all of us are creating, even though I don't know any of these people's names, but like that sense, just kind of that animistic sense of how we're all connected. I don't know. I don't mean to get like too Disney about it, but it feels very special and it feels very singular to different kinds of urban experiences.
No, I think I want to hear your thoughts on this too, but I think there is something there that's really special because I do think it's when I lived in the suburbs, I felt a lot more isolated. And even though I am very introverted and it's very easy for me to just hermit in the house and like not go anywhere or do anything or talk to people, even though my job really means that I'm talking to people every day, but it's very easy for me to kind of pull back and not be in the city. But I feel like there is a way that it's very easy to be isolated in the suburbs of like, I go to my house and then I drive in my car by myself to my office and I go sit in my office or wherever you're working. And then I drive to the grocery store, and like you can kind of just be in this little pod in a different way. Whereas in the city, you can't avoid people. And sometimes that is aggravating. Sometimes it's like, oh my God, I wish I could just be alone and not be reminded that there are millions of people around me at every goddamn minute. But sometimes it's really nice. And I think if you still like living in a city, you appreciate that a lot. The feeling of like, we're all here together, when Mamdani won, like, you could feel it in the air. Like there was an electricity.
It was electric.
Like you could feel it because we were all so excited. And like, that is just a thing you're not necessarily going to have the same experience of if you're in a more removed area where there aren't people literally like all around you at all times.
And I think there's just something so singular to when when like what's like a majority or a very concentrated amount of people, which millions of people in very few square miles here, like the energy is elevated, or the energy, like I think of how like it was on the train the day after Trump was elected in 2016. Yes. I will never fucking forget that day.
Like that's wild.
Because I was like, B, you were here that.
Oh yeah.
And like I remember when I got to the office, the like native New Yorkers and folks who'd been here for like 20 years, they were like, this feels like the day after 9/11.
Yeah.
Like the city, it just, you feel, it's so hard to explain.
Quiet. It was so quiet. And everyone was just kind of, every woman on the subway had red eyes. Like
Yes.
anyone you made eye contact with, we were all like, fuck. You know, you could just see it on everyone's face. It was, yeah.
It was haunting. It was
haunting, but it still felt very like, I'm not the only one, you know, like I get to make eye contact with hundreds of people on my way anywhere who all feel the same way that I do. And there is something about that that does feel still supported, even if you're like, I don't know who this person is, right?
So if you're in more of a suburban setting, I've just been thinking about these types of places that you're talking about. And it makes me think of libraries, theaters, like what are your common areas? And maybe you're not going to go there and light a candle and like do a spell. But I think so much of wanting to feel a part of the animate everything, which is a Sophie Strand phrase that has recently entered and blown apart my lexicon. Just in terms of like a way to say the all. But if you're looking, I think that's what we're all looking for on some level of witchcraft, is to be a part of the animate everything. And so if you are looking for that with people, you know, with humans, what are your community spaces? I think that will allow you to have that same feeling. Also, like who's hosting, I know I mentioned meditation, but like what are the Maha Roses in Brooklyn? What are the Alchemist Kitchen in Chelsea? Like, where are the places that are hosting events, that are hosting classes? I mean, even in my hometown of Folsom, California, you can go to Planet Earth Rising on Main Street. It's called Sutter Street. And you can go and shop for crystals or take some kind of new age spiritual class, or go in their back room where they have bowls and huge crystals that no one will ever be able to afford in this lifetime. And you can sit in that room and soak it all in. But like, you know, where are the spaces that you can commune with others? I think you don't have to be doing a spell to, like you both are saying, be a part of collective energy and like gain, you know, use that as a resource, I think.
And be energized by it. And those kinds of spaces, those kinds of like common spaces, third spaces that you're talking about, B. It's also like, this is also partly why witchcraft is political. Politics are relevant, because like when those common third spaces where we do get to go across the country, across the world, no matter the size of the town you live in, when those spaces are like being like defunded or their hours are getting cut, like even in New York, it's been a fight. Like you would think in a city this size that the libraries would be secure, and they're not. And it's been an active fight for the last few years around the funding crisis and closing all public libraries on Sundays. So in the way that witchcraft is political, like, you know, doing witchcraft on behalf of those spaces and on behalf of our like cities at large.
Yeah.
I'll stop my soapbox, but
well, no, I mean, I don't think it's a soapbox at all, because I think even so far as like, okay, if you live in a city, then public natural spaces become important to you in a way that maybe don't if you're living in another setting. So even like this big, beautiful bill that is actually going to sell off all of this federal, you know, protected natural land, it's like, that's witchcraft is political. Like we need that natural space. We want to protect it, you know. So I think there are many political actions that are witchcraft in your own city. And that just has to do with, again, what we're talking about of like, if you live in a city, you can be more naturally a part of a city community. And that doesn't mean that you know everyone's face or see everyone, but you're all contributing to the same ecosystem.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think there's a lot to learn from all kinds of spaces, but I think sometimes cities get a bad rap, and they're also like where the people are.
Yeah. Like, it's really meaningful to me, I think, especially like we're recording this. Pride is officially over, so I guess none of us are gay anymore.
Yeah, we're just mad now. It's rough.
Yeah.
But in that way that like a lot of the protests and parades and like Dyke March, you know, that was just last weekend, which Meg and I didn't go to because we're part of the problem. We stay home. We are lesbians, we stay home. But I think about how like thousands and thousands and thousands of people marching in a place, like, again, raises energy, like really can put shit in motion. And there's a reason that I think we see a lot of these movements begin in major cities and then spread. Because that energy is getting like raised and directed here. And it can be, again, we can do it wherever we are individually, but like, you know, there's something to the collective working of a protest and raising the energy against or for something. So also around the public lands thing, may the ghost of Teddy Roosevelt haunt Trump and all of these Republicans. May the ghost of Teddy Roosevelt just like obliterate them into whatever. Yeah, that's my prayer.
Like, you heard it here first, folks. I just want to shout out some LA places because we've just done New York places. And then I would love like to have a Coven directory. Like if you have places in your city, like let's start a list.
Yeah.
But in LA, I first want to shout out the Crooked Path in Burbank of all places. They have a Hecate altar space, like a huge second floor temple basically to her. It's open, so it's not, I don't know if it's open all the time or if you have to ask for it, but it's there. And I was able to go up, and it has a prayer, and you can leave. You can't really add to theirs, but there are options, like opportunities to leave offerings or intentions or stuff like that. So the Crooked Path, and they're also an amazing occult shop as well. And House of Intuition is big in LA. The original one is in Echo Park. It's in a house. You have to climb stairs, so it's not accessible. But there are a lot of them, and they also do ship online. To be honest, I've had some really good experiences with House of Intuition materia, and then just some like not so great, kind of blandish experiences. But they have a lot of items, and if you like to get candles that are already fixed, you can go there. Also, Madame Pamita is an LA-based creator, and she has a shop. It's online. They do readings. She fixes candles as well. You can take classes. And then in the Valley, there are a couple like herbal stores. There's the Green Man that's in North Hollywood. That's a like Botanica apothecary. Oh shoot, there's one more and it's escaping me. I will think about it. And we'll link it in the show notes, and I'll add it to our directory.
Yeah, and we can add more shops as well. There's some like herbal shops and other places that I definitely want to give a shout out to.
Yeah,
so,
it's gonna be like shout out to Seven Stars in Boston, well, in Cambridge, technically, around like being the first place that I ever went to for fun. Nice witchy bookstore.
Yeah, and I think we've had a few conversations as of late that we've just ended kind of saying we could go on about this forever. So we are always curious to see what parts of this land for people listening. So let us know either in the comments, or you can reach out to us at callyourcoven@gmail.com or on social, whatever works for you. But yeah, I would be curious, especially on this one, like what are the things that we didn't talk about or that didn't come up that you think are important to city witchcraft?
And shout out your favorite spots and your favorite shops and bookstores in the comments. I like the idea of a directory. I think that's fun.
That feels like a good Patreon thing, like a list, post list to keep updating so that people can check it out.
Yes.
That's very doable.
Yeah, our Patreon. We love you all of our patrons. We love and cherish you, and we realize we've abandoned you. But we were always clear that the $5 tier was supportive, and we genuinely cherish each and every one of you. We also, speaking of our full circle to our year anniversary coming up, we do have some thoughts about the Patreon and how we can better serve that space and start to grow some more Coven related things in there. So stay tuned.
Yeah.
Okay, well, at this point, we will see you in a few short weeks for the August forecast.
Because it's August already.
Allegedly.
I feel sick.
It's definitely not when we're recording this, but when you listen to this, we'll be closer than ever.
Yes. And I am also working on a special episode that we will drop. We're going to start a new kind of series that will slowly kind of expand out into the world, and we'll drop some occasional episodes on this series when they make sense, and I'm going to be doing the first one, so I think it's probably dropping at some point in July. We're going to find out, so okay. That'll be cool. Stay tuned for the secret.
The secret series.
Secret.
Yes. All right, cool. Well, happy July. Happy July. Happy everything.
Happy all the things. Take care of yourselves out there.
Love y'all.
Love you.